Hello, everyone. Welcome to week 9. Today, my fellow group members and I will present to you the topic on opiates and their effects on today's world. Just some food for thought questions that the class could think about and answer on their own. It would help them identify the knowledge that people have acquired on their own and the information that you all have obtained over time. So, we have what are opiates? And we have you ever known anyone who has struggled with opiate addiction? And do you believe that opiates affect individuals, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally as well? Moving on, here what we wanted to display is a timeline of the opiate drug through its origin and its use today. So, as we can see in early history, we will be talking about the origin of the drug. In the 19th century, we will be talking about the issues that began to arise. In the 20th century, we will analyze the awareness of the danger of opiates, and then obviously in today's society, the opiate epidemic, which is what we had researched. The knowledge and awareness of this drug continues to progress throughout the years, and in the following slides, we will continue to further discuss these timeline. As the presentation continues,
Early history of opiates.
As the presentation continues, we just wanted to insert a couple of little did you knows, a little bit of interesting facts that relate to the opiate drug. So we have some alternative forms, which is in regards to the DOTA, which is an illegal form of heroin. It is crushed poppy, pop mixed with liquid. It is common among some populations in Canada, and it is used to stay awake and sustain energy. Opiates can also be used for medical use. The major medical use for opiate drugs is in the treatment of severe pain, and then the effects of the drug. Opiates depress respiration, lower body temperature, and cause capillary constriction. They induce a pleasurable euphoria as well as relieve pain.
Early history of opiates. Opiates are native to the Middle East, but over the years they have cultivated throughout Asia and the Middle East. Opium comes from the Papaver somniferum, which is one of the many species from the poppy plant. The procedure to extract the opium from the flower consists of round seed pods left from the fallen petals from the bloomed plant. This seed pod contains what is stated to be a milky white sap, and this can be seen by the cut of a knife. When this white substance dries, it becomes fairly thick, brown, and almost gum-like. This substance is referred to as opium. Opiums are commonly taken orally or by smoking them. Sumerian and Assyrian civilization opium use. There is evidence that suggests these civilizations used opiates approximately 6,000 years ago. The ancient Egyptians' medical uses. The ancient Egyptians actually discovered uses for opiates 3,500 years ago. The Greek and Roman civilizations' use of opiums for medical purposes. There was a great Greek physician known as Galen who stated that some of the uses for opiums included resistance of poison, venomous bites, cures of chronic headaches, loss of voice, epilepsy, dimness of sight, fevers, coughs, asthma, and so on.
Continuing on the history of opiates, it did not stop there, as the popularity of the opiate drug continued to grow well into the 19th century. We can look at China and how it was a serious problem and how it started there. So it had not surfaced in Europe and or North America by this time. It was also very available in that it was in liquid medication form for pain. It was also the main use of opiates as well as patent medicines, used in patent medicines as well. There was also a term called opium eating. This term was used at this point in history because they were only taken orally, and through a liquid for this was considered opium eating, even if the patients would drink the liquid and not eat it. Next, we have opium and its pleasurable properties. Because of how addictive the properties are, it began to spread and be used for non medical purposes. There was also a book written by Thomas de Quincey, which highlighted these effects of opium, glamorizing the addictive properties within the drug and fueling the use of the drug. Opium became a widespread problem, not only in China anymore. Because of Thomas de Quincey's works, this caused for many other writers and scientific figures to identify the drug's highly addictive properties and the dependency of it from person to person. Next, we have F.W. Suttner, the process. He was a German pharmacist. He developed the separation between morphine from the opium, which added to the problems as well. This process caused more issues to arise because he discovered that the effects of morphine were 10 times more stronger than opium alone. Was taken aback by the blissful and dreamlike state from morphine, hence why he named it after the Greek god of dreams, Morpheus. The development of the hypodermic syringe was a way for morphine to be injected into the body and continued to raise concern and issue across Europe and North America as people swiftly became majorly dependent on the drug this way. Then we have injecting morphine. This became the most common way to treat severe wounds and was used during the recovery of these wounds due to its pain free feeling when taken. Then we have the term heroin, which at this time it was coined. It was discovered in the form of an opiate. The compound was first discovered by Alder Wright, but his works were left unread. But when a German pharmacologist, Heinrich Dresser, rediscovered the compound of the altered morphine and identified that it was even more potent and displayed heroic feelings of possibility, coining the term of heroin.
Use in the 20th century and today. In the 20th century, there began to be a greater awareness of the dangers of opiate use and dependence. This caused many legal changes in both the United States and Canada. The creation of the 1914 Harrison Narcotics Acts in the United States was a federal law that aimed to regulate and tax the production, importation, and distribution of opiates and the cocoa products. It evidently gave the control to the physician and their determination if an individual truly needed the drug for medical use. Although this did not eliminate the non-medical use of opiates, it actually began the drug crime in America. Just as many illegal drugs, opiates began to be smuggled into the country, leading the prices to increase, and those who were dependent on the drugs had to pay more. In 1915, physicians were told that they must not prescribe opiates unless it was evident that the dose of drug was gradually decreasing. Known addicts may not be prescribed opiates, and the heroin must never be prescribed. 1924, there was a complete elimination of the prescription of heroin. The Opium Act in 1908. This was Canada's first drug prohibition legislation, and later in 1929, the Opium and Narcotic Drug Act became Canada's main instrument of drug policy. This caused many individuals to turn to the black market. Because of these new regulations for obtaining opiates, many people, especially addicts, turned to the black market, which we will expand more in the next slide. 1960s and 70s, the increase of illicit drug use in Canada and the United States, leading to criminalization. In Canada, the most commonly used pharmaceutical are opioid pain relievers, and the number continues to rise. Use in the 20th century and today continued. Today, Afghanistan produces more than 90% of the world's opium. As stated before, opiates are native to the Middle East, but today most heroin comes from the poppies grown in South Asia. The opium is processed to heroin and further transported to Europe or Mexico before being smuggled into the United States and Canada to again be sold on the black market. Heroin abuse leading to criminal activity. Due to the difficulty of obtaining the opiate through the black market, it causes the prices of substance to increase, and those individuals who are addicted tend to lose their jobs, homes, and so on, due to their money going directly to the drug use and addiction. Designer heroin known as MPTP. This drug is an illicit production by chemists who design and develop chemical analogs to heroin. These are untested compounds made to create the same effects of opiates, but are stated to be 10 to 1,000 times more potent than heroin, making the risk of death much higher. Users risk permanent damage due to loss of cells as well as premature Parkinson's disease. Opioids today are more dangerous to users due to them being more potent than the original drug. Today, there are dangerous added compounds to the drug, such as fentanyl, which is 50 times more potent than heroin, causing many deaths. A new form of opium known as Dota in Canada. Dota is another illegal drug within Canada, yet it is still a very popular form of opiate. It also comes from the poppy pod and is commonly mixed with liquids such as tea and as well as within a mixture for meat seasoning. It is suggested to help individuals stay awake for long periods of time and overall give them energy, relaxation, calmness, etc. Dota is commonly used by construction workers, taxi drivers, and so on. Although there are negative side effects such as loss of concentration, slurred speech, mood swings, and others. The opiate epidemic. Most recently, we have experienced an opiate epidemic which has caused many addictions, sufferings, deaths, and more throughout the world. Marina will be going more in depth with the current state of the opiate epidemic in later slides.
Now, moving on to prescription opiates abuse. So, to start off, we have the Controlled Drugs and Substance Act. This act is governed in Canada and it is used to control and regulate opioid medication from use. This act serves to have an important purpose because the act deals with people who possess the drug without a license, also looks out for people who try to sell the drug to other people who do not have a prescription, and also watched out for people who double doctor. Quite an interesting term, as it means that people try to retrieve a prescription of an opiate from more than one doctor in a short period of time. Then there was also theft of opium drugs, and that were reported to Health Canada, meaning that anyone in the pharmaceutical industry, which could range from the manufacturer to practitioners, must report any incident of theft or loss of opiate medication. So Health Canada will be able to track and see where the medication went missing. So then we have the dramatic increase of opioid drug use has tripled from 1990 to present day. There has been this increase, which has now risen according to World Health Organization. The US have at least 10.5 million people addicted to opiates such as heroin, and 13% of Canadians use opiates non-medically. This pertaining to the topic that we have researched, being as there seems to be an epidemic of opioids around certain parts of the world that continue to increase as the years go on. Then there is the most publicized drug, which is Oxycontin in 2015-2016, the main reason for drug treatment admissions. Along with the increase of addiction to the drug, there is also the increase of drug treatment admissions and emergency room mentions, and most of them resulting from an addiction to Oxycontin. Now we can get into the drug itself. Oxycontin, this type of drug has been on the pharmaceutical market for decades and was prescribed as a painkiller to treat severe and chronic pain. But the problem with it was the high dosage of oxycodone in the medication. Because the drug was so powerful, people who became addicted to the drug found other ways to ingest the drug. For example, crushing it into powder so they were able to inject it and or snorting it. The US announcing their strategy to limit the use of Oxycontin because of the high dose of one tablet within the opiate. It has caused for the abuse, addiction, and overdose to increase by 30% in Canada as well from 2008. And as for the US, they too were seeing this drastic increase and tried to come up with ways in which they could lower the dosage, but it still does not seem to be working effectively as they are still selling a high dosage but less higher than before. Then we have the overdose and deaths that have happened in Canada and the US. So that have led to Canada and the US to believe that they are in a crisis. Again, relating to our topic chosen to go in depth about, as the death rates due to overdose is increasing, and a lot of them are due to fentanyl use within the opiate drugs.
Did you know? Morphine and codeine are chemicals directly derived from opium. Intravenous drug use accounts for almost half of the cases of HIV/AIDS transmission across the world because of contaminated needles. The marked increase in the number of opioid overdoses in Canada has resulted in a revised action plan for the public health towards harm reduction.
How do opiates work? So in this section, we're going to discuss the absorption, distribution, metabolism, excretion of opiates, as well as the discovery of endorphins and what endorphins do. We're going to discuss the absorption of opiates. They're mostly absorbed from the gastrointestinal tract, the nasal mucosa and lungs, intramuscular injection, or subcutaneous injection, being beneath the skin. This is why opium and heroin are often smoked, and heroin is often taken intranasally. Intravenous injection creates a greater effect, and popular street methods for heroin include intravenous or mainlining, intramuscular, and subcutaneous injection. Distribution, metabolism, and excretion. Opiates distribute through the body and accumulate in the kidneys, the lungs, the liver, spleen, digestive tract, muscles, and brain. The blood-brain barrier. Small amount penetrates the blood-brain barrier when some opiates, such as morphine, are taken. Other opiates, like heroin, penetrate more effectively as they're more lipid-soluble. The metabolism of opiates. They are metabolized rapidly in the liver, and the excretion of opiates. Opiates are excreted by the kidneys. It is a rapid excretion, meaning there is 90% excreted within 24 hours. Traces may remain for 2 to 4 days. Moving on to the discovery of endorphins. In the 1960s, naloxone, a chemical that reverses and blocks the effects of opiates, was known for having similar chemical structure to morphine. This inspired research into the common brain receptor site for the two. In the 1970s, Candace Pert and Solomon Snyder discovered opiate receptors. These are brain receptors that respond specifically to opiates. Research continued to find similar structure in our own brain chemicals. In 1975, several chemicals were discovered and labeled endorphins. These include the beta endorphin, enkephalin, and dynorphin. So what do endorphins do? Ongoing research states that endorphins likely have similar properties to opiates, meaning they assist with pain relief and feelings of pleasure. Like a natural pain relief system that releases endorphins after pain or stress and produces pain relief or even analgesia, the inability to feel pain. Supporting evidence. Evidence supports naloxone reversible analgesia from acupuncture. Since naloxone blocks endorphin receptors, this supports the theory that acupuncture triggers endorphin release through pain relief. The placebo effect supports the theory of endorphin release as a method of pain control. One takes the placebo thinking it is a pain relief medication. Endorphins release as they assume they will feel pain relief. Actual pain relief is felt through the release of endorphins.
Next up, we have our brain on opiates. On the slide here, we have 3 ways in which it affects the brain. Starting off with, in the normal functioning of the nervous system, neurotransmitters are released in the synaptic cleft by vesicles and terminal buttons of sending neurons. Many are taken up by receptor sites in receiving neurons. Next, we have in the process called reuptake, send neurons typically reabsorb excess molecules of neurotransmitters. Opiates such as heroin, bind to opiate receptors in the brain. This stops the inhibitory neurotransmitters from blocking the release of dopamine, and dopamine floods the synapse. And this was also discovered none other than two researchers by the names of Candice Pert and Solomon Snyder, who studied at the Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. Their great discovery involved finding receptors in the brain, as I had mentioned in the slide, that responded to the opiate drugs like morphine. Many people were skeptical of this, questioned whether or not we as humans were born with these structures in the brain that were able to respond to opiate use. Later on, as technology developed and the hunt of these morphine like structures was commencing, a discovery of peptide molecules now known as endorphins were discovered.
Opiates are most commonly used for their medical benefits. Opiate drugs have analgesic and pain relieving properties that are frequently utilized within medical settings. Unlike many depressant type anesthetic drugs, opiate analgesics are very effective at relieving pain within individuals while having them in a state of consciousness. Many over the counter painkillers have similar analgesic properties to those of opioids. However, medicinally, opiate drugs are most potent and selective painkillers.
Did you know? Opium is produced from the sap of the poppy plant, and it has been used for medicinal purpose for centuries. Alcohol and other depressant drugs act synergistically with heroin and other opiates. These combinations are often fatal. There are around 89,000 Canadians who inject opiates, which represents 0.3% of Canadians.
The intake of opiates can physically affect the following areas, more specifically in terms of heroin. It can affect your head in that it creates a euphoric state, confusion, drowsiness, your eyes with constricted pupils, your stomach with nausea and vomiting, your body with reduced pain, your chest, slowing respiration, your skin, making it clammy, itchy, or burning, as well as your torso, increasing your body temperature.
There are various acute psychological effects of opioids. To begin, opioids produce a euphoric feeling within individuals and are known to make people feel drowsiness, increased body warmth, and heavy feeling of their limbs. The feelings that opioids are known to produce are also reported to have very pleasurable effects. The feeling of using opioids, like morphine, are comparable to a spreading wave of relaxation that makes individuals feel as if they are floating. Furthermore, the use of opioid drugs may interfere with cognitive functions, including impairments in one's learning and memory. In addition to this, there are also acute physiological effects of using opiate drugs. Opioids can cause respiratory depression and lowered body temperature, similarly to the physiological effects of depressant drugs. Opioids can also cause nausea and vomiting. Opioid poisoning can also occur and can be distinguished by the diagnostic sign of pinpoint pupils. Finally, the use of opioid and depressant drugs is very dangerous and oftentimes lethal when used together because both of these drugs in combination can potentiate one another.
The chronic
Withdrawal and
the chronic effects of opiates. And what we're going to be talking about is the tolerance. So, tolerance can develop with opiates. We can definitely identify the importance of the analysis of tolerance within a drug. We can also see this within opiate users as well because the effect can diminish from the drug as long as the dosage is not increased. There was a study done between a human and monkey and their intake of continuous opiate drug intake. The person used for the experiment had a history of drug abuse and was used for the experiment to regulate his intravenous morphine dose. Over time, there was a gradual increase of his dose, and his dose never surpassing 500 milligrams. But by the fourth month, he was able to take more than 1,000 milligrams, as he built up the tolerance from the dosage he was receiving. And both the monkey and the human had a similar tolerance to the drug after its administration.
Withdrawal and dependence. Dependence of opiates to re experience the rush. Many times, individuals who are addicted to opiates develop a dependence of the drug and almost yearn for that feeling associated with the substance. This can be that rush or euphoric feeling. Many times, individuals who develop a tolerance for opiates feel the need to up the dose of the drugs to continue to feel that same level of high. Withdrawal symptoms are most commonly seen after 1 or 2 weeks of chronic use when an individual becomes dependent of the drug, including heroin, morphine, and so on. As long-term use with high doses, the symptoms become more severe. Early indications of withdrawal can occur 8 to 12 hours after the last dose taken. Symptoms include pupil dilation, anorexia, flu-like symptoms, and as time passes, the symptoms worsen. The cold turkey user. This expression comes from the symptoms that an addict may physically experience that tend to worsen and reach a peak after 48 to 72 hours, including increase in heart rate and blood pressure, severe flu-like symptoms, nausea, diarrhea, sweating. In addition, they may experience spastic movements of the arms and legs. As for the sexual system, there is a heightened sense of arousal, including spontaneous erection and ejaculations in men and orgasms in women. Lastly, the lack of appetite and loss of fluids causes individuals who are experiencing withdrawal to feel physically and emotionally drained. Overall, when dealing with withdrawal, there is always a risk of death. 90% of individuals after detoxification relapse in the first 6 months. In the 1970s, soldiers returning from war were required to go through detoxification, but given the relapse rate of 90%, many ended up returning home with the dependence of substances such as heroin. One must take into account that in their environment at war, this drug was easily accessible, whereas when they returned home, this was not the case anymore. It is important that we acknowledge the hardships that an individual may go through due to their environment when going with withdrawal due to their dependence of the drug. We have included 2 videos released by the Government of Canada to raise awareness and the stigma in regards to the current state of the opiate epidemic and to further provide assistance in what actions to take when witnessing an opiates overdose, as well as where to turn for help if you are struggling with an addiction.
I never thought drugs would impact someone close to me.
That people would judge and make her feel invisible. That he'd be ashamed to talk about his opioid use.
He felt like he couldn't ask for help, even though he was my husband. Our daughter.
My best friend.
Canadians are dying of overdoses every day. Stigma is making it harder for people to get help. Addiction is a treatable medical condition, not a choice. Help end the stigma. A message from the Government of Canada.
I never thought drugs would impact someone close to me.
If you witness an opioid overdose, don't turn away. Stay and call 911 or your local emergency number. Follow their instructions and administer naloxone if you have it. Even if you've taken drugs or have some on you, the Good Samaritan law can protect you. It's important to stay until help arrives. The Government of Canada is taking action. Together we can help save lives. If you witness an opioid overdose,
The opioid epidemic has primarily occurred due to the significant increase in opioid prescriptions to help individuals control their acute and chronic pain. In fact, approximately 4% of adults in the United States of America consume opioids regularly, With the use of opioids increasing, the rates of opioid overdoses, misuse of opioids, and admissions to drug treatment programs have also increased. Opioid related drug overdoses account for approximately 30,000 deaths within Americans each year, and this rate is on an upward spiral, meaning that it does increase every single year.
You've heard me rail on healthcare triage about how accidents and guns are huge killers of children. But when it comes to adults, drug overdoses are a much bigger problem. In 2014, about 34,000 adults died in car crashes, and about the same number of deaths resulted from gun violence. But more than 47,000 people died from drug overdoses. This episode is brought to you in part by generous support from the National Institute of Healthcare Management.
Centers for Disease Control and Prevention published an article that explains the distinction of the three waves of opioid overdose deaths and the rates at which the opioid-related drug overdose deaths were occurring at. The first wave emerged in the 1990s as a result of the widespread use of the natural and semi-synthetic opioids and methadone prescriptions. The second wave occurred in 2010, and the increase in opioid overdose deaths were related to the drug's affiliation with the use of heroin. Finally, 2013 marks the third wave of the opioid-related overdose deaths, which was largely due to the use of synthetic opioids in combination with fentanyl. Dreamland, The True Tale of America's Opioid Epidemic is an article that examines the complexity of the rapid increase of pharmaceutical opioid abuse. Through establishing various perspectives to the uprising of this epidemic, this article reinforces the origin of opioid abuse and its proliferation, as well as the development of pharmaceutical marketing of opioids within large corporations. The amalgamation, navigated by its prescriptions endorsed to individuals, has been largely attributed to the widespread abuse of opioids, specifically within communities who have been vulnerable to emotionally enduring circumstances. This can be seen through the loss of manufacturing occupations and the misfortunes of locally owned small businesses due to the emergence of chains of modern businesses.
On this slide, we have several well-known individuals who have struggled with opioids addiction at some point in their lives. Some have even lost their lives due to their addiction. It is important that we understand that opioids addiction can occur within any individual, and it is crucial that we understand the current state of the epidemic, as well as what we can do to prevent the abuse and use of these opioid drugs. Resources. Here are some resources that we have included. If you know anyone suffering, or if you are currently suffering from an addiction, please contact any of the organizations included above.